Batya Ungar-Sargon is the deputy opinion editor for Newsweek, and from what she told us, she was a hardline liberal for most of her life, but she has recently had a change of heart. Here's part of our interview. Batya, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I don't know how you would describe yourself. Feel free to, set the record straight, but you were a former Democrat. Where do you think that the Democrats have gone wrong in their messaging?
So I would call myself a left-wing populist, sometimes socialist, depending on how you define that. I would say I'm a socialist in the way that I think President Trump was. He pursued a lot of economic policies that Senator Bernie Sanders was advocating for as recently as 2015. So I'm very much on board with all of that. And that's what the problem, I think, is with the Democrats today is they've really abandoned their erstwhile advocacy on behalf of labor and the working class, and they see their base increasingly as the college educated and the very highly educated. And so you'll see their platform has morphed to really reflect that. So a lot of the open borders policies, essentially. Who benefits from open borders and who pays the price for it? The working class pays the price for it because you suddenly have an underclass willing to work for less than minimum wage. And who benefits from it is the people who want to employ people for less than minimum wage as domestic servants in their homes, or people who want a really nice $15 bottle of wine who don't want to pay for an American to have picked those grapes. And so that the shift on immigration that you've seen among the Democrats over the last 10, 20 years really reflects their shift in who their focus is. There are other things. You'll see people who call themselves progressives advocating for $50,000 in student loan forgiveness. Ask yourself, who has $50,000 in student loans, right? It's accountants and dentists and doctors and nurse practitioners, people who are making really good money. And who's going to be paying off those student loans? Who's going to be paying the taxes on that? I mean, those people, but also the 90% of Americans who are not in the elites, the people who are working class. And so instead of representing welders and linemen and factory workers today, the Democrats are the party asking those people to pay off the student loans of dentists and accountants. I'll just give you one more example. I think with COVID, you really saw the liberals and the Democrats abandoning the essential workers the minute they could. So we were all happy to stand outside and cheer for them when we, the elites, were at home working in our pajamas, clacking away on our keyboards, relying on the labor of working class Americans who went into the pandemic, went into the belly of the beast, into danger, put their lives on line every single day. And then the minute we had a vaccine, suddenly the liberals stopped cheering for those people and started denouncing the people who didn't want the vaccine. Those very same first responders and grocery workers, nurses, cops, people who just maybe don't want the vaccine because they know how to keep themselves from getting and spreading COVID, because they spent the most dangerous time learning how not to get and spread COVID.
Wow, so many things to unpack there, really. It sounds to me like you're saying that there were a lot of contradictory things that you've seen throughout, the course of time. What would you say was your aha moment, if you will?
I remember learning about the deaths of despair in rural America, primarily targeting people without a college degree, men without a college degree, who are increasingly dying of opioid overdoses or suicide. And I remember thinking, these are the people that my class, the highly educated lefty liberals who are on the news every night, have the most contempt for. They go on the news every night and call them racist because they voted for Trump, right?
Batya, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
As of Wednesday, the U.S. is seeing a record number of CCP virus pediatric hospital admissions. Almost 1,000 children were hospitalized with confirmed infection. It's the highest number throughout the pandemic. Federal data shows that 951 children with the CCP virus were admitted to hospitals on Wednesday. New pediatric admissions started to skyrocket from last week, but President Biden said that schools should remain open. Hospitalizations are also rising among adults. Nearly 115,000 Americans with the CCP virus are currently hospitalized. The Deputy Postmaster General is asking the government for a temporary delay from the COVID-19 vaccine mandate for U.S. Postal Service employees. The mandate requires USPS workers to either be vaccinated or get weekly testing. Deputy Postmaster General Doug Tolino sent a letter to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. In the letter, he wrote that the mandate will likely cause many postal employees to quit or be fired. Tolino suggests that with the current supply chain and staffing challenges, the U.S. cannot afford more potential setbacks to our mail delivery systems. He is requesting a 120-day extension of the deadlines to comply with the mandate. North Korea acknowledged its latest missile launch early on Thursday, a day after South Korean authorities first reported it. The U.S. State Department condemned the launch. The United States condemned North Korea's ballistic missile launch on Wednesday, saying it violated multiple UN Security Council resolutions and posted a threat to Pyongyang's neighbors. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin are set to meet virtually with their Japanese counterparts today for regular security talks. Pyongyang state media called the launch a hypersonic missile and said that it traveled 435 miles to hit its target, including a 75-mile lateral movement. The launch came shortly after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un vowed to further strengthen his military capability. Here to discuss the recent missile launch by Pyongyang, we have Grant Newsham, a retired Marine officer and now with One Korea Network and also a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy. Grant Newsham, thank you so much for joining us in the Capitol Report.
No, pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Now, Grant, on Thursday, North Korea said it successfully tested a second hypersonic missile off the East Coast, causing major concerns for Japan and South Korea. This is advanced weaponry that can fly 5 times faster than the speed of sound. For starters, can you explain the threat posed by this type of technology and how far along it is that North Korea is in producing these types of weapons?
Well, the technology is it's a threat. Make no mistake, it's been known that the Chinese in particular have been working on it for well over a decade and that they've had things that work. But what it does is, if you think of it, say you're shooting at a clay pigeon with a shotgun, and suppose the pigeon suddenly goes 5 times faster than you're expecting it, and then suppose that it suddenly drifts, goes to the left, to the right, up, down, it's able to maneuver. That makes it a very much harder thing to shoot. And current anti-missile defense systems are geared towards that slower pigeon that doesn't change his direction. So that's sort of how a layman might understand it. It is a huge problem from a defensive perspective because it's very hard to track, to follow, to hit. And you'll see I mentioned Chinese inadvertently because the North Koreans couldn't develop this without Chinese assistance. But the North Korean missile and nuclear programs have undergone a steady upward improvement in capabilities in terms of missiles so that the missiles can go farther and can hit what they aim at more accurately. So eventually they're going to get the range, and Washington, D.C. is going to be in range, and they'll have the accuracy down to where they can hit what they aim at. But the hypersonic part of it, as I said, that just makes it a very much harder thing to stop. The best solution to it is to have your own capabilities and to make it clear that anyone that uses one, that they'll get 100 in return.
Now, Grant, on the issue of China, North Korea's major ally, Communist China, North Korea is certainly creating tensions before the Beijing Olympics. China has called for dialogue. What do you think will happen next?
The Olympics will be held, and once that's done, we're going to see what we've seen for the last 20 years, which will be the North Koreans improving their technologies, their capabilities, conducting launches, constantly sort of spewing out venom verbally. But the missiles and nuclear tests, those will continue. And North Korea, it's playing the same old game. It's trying to get concessions. And there will be pressure put on the United States to talk, to just negotiate, to accept North Korea as it is. The Chinese will put that pressure on. The South Korean leftist administrations will as well. And even within the U.S., there will be a push to have the Americans just talk, to so-called give peace a chance. But it'll be the same old game that we've seen for a long time. I've been following the North Korean business for 30 years, and absolutely nothing has surprised me. It is as predictable as the sun coming up in the east every morning.
Now, Grant, looking back at former President Trump's relationship with North Korea, it started out very rocky, with Trump blatantly stating that the U.S. military could easily destroy North Korea with fire and fury that the world has never seen before. But later, Trump and Kim held an unprecedented summit between the two nations. They seem to have developed a bit of a rapport. Was there ever a possibility of peaceful relations with North Korea under the Trump administration? And what should we expect to see under the Biden administration?
Well, I think you could have seen some potential improvement during the Trump administration, but ironically, it would have happened while Mr. Trump was threatening fire and brimstone against the North Koreans. The so-called maximum pressure campaign that the Trump administration applied was showing some results, and also they were wisely emphasizing the absolute human rights abomination that is the North Korean regime. And that was actually working. So when I say North China put the screws on them, you'll recall that before Kim met with Mr. Trump, that he had a meeting with the Chinese at their demand, and they apparently read the Riot Act to him and said, "You'd better not cut any deals with the Americans." And at that point, there was really very little chance of things improving. But it was that maximum pressure campaign, both sanctions and the credible threat of military force, if necessary, that was putting sort of the screws on North Korea for the first time ever. There's been sanctions on North Korea for a long time to a degree, but they've never really been enforced. But the Americans this time were serious, and they were giving some other countries the choice of doing business with North Korea or with doing business with the Americans. And it could have worked because it is that access to foreign currency, to luxury goods, and to some raw materials, and oil in particular, that really keeps the North Korean regime afloat. Without that, it wouldn't last for a week.
Grant Newsham, thank you.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much.
10 days before inauguration, Virginia Governor-elect Glenn Youngkin has tapped the Trump administration's EPA chief to join his cabinet, overseeing the state's environmental policy. Andrew Wheeler is Youngkin's pick for Secretary of Natural Resources, the transition team announced on Wednesday. This has drawn immediate criticism from some Democrats and environmental groups who accused Wheeler of downplaying the threats of climate change. During Wheeler's term heading the EPA, the Trump administration took a sweeping change on Obama-era policies by easing restrictions on coal-fired power plants. Youngkin has also chose Michael Rolbend, the founder of a natural and historic resources consulting firm, to lead the Department of Environmental Quality.